right, let's kick this off. Thank you everyone for joining this webinar today about achieving zero trust for corporate network. My name is Tal Laufer. I'm VP Product at Perimeter 81. And along with me, we have Richard Stiennon, who is an industry analyst from IT Harvest, and Amit Barakat, our CEO, as well as Kim Kunzler, a leader in our sales team. Let's go ahead and start. First of all, I have to apologize. We were supposed to have Paul from Aqua Security join us as well, and due to a last-minute family emergency, he was not able to make it. We are going to cover the customer use case, and Amit, our CEO, is going to present that a little bit later on. Let's look at the agenda for today. As we just did the speaker's introduction, I'm going to talk about the state of zero trust in 2022, talk about zero trust from the analyst perspective with Richard, and we're going to do a customer showcase that Amit is going to present. We're going to also have audience Q&A. You are more than welcome to add your questions in the chat window, and we will address them. And last, we're going to have a demo of our product led by Kim. So let's kick it off, everybody. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the security threats that are out there in the market. We are all hearing about them in the news. They are everywhere. And we have looked into a few industry reports to really highlight the different threats that are more present in today's cyber world. First of all, the first finding is very interesting, that 82% of the breaches involve the human element, and that includes phishing, errors, and misuse. That means that a specific employee, clicked the wrong link, right? They went into a phishing site, they clicked on it, they haven't noticed that something was off with it. Sometimes the human error includes leaving their credentials out in the open, reusing their credentials. There's a lot about the human element, a lot of human mistakes that make that really enable these kind of attacks, these cyber attacks. 13% increase in ransomware attacks. So before that, there were viruses, there were a bunch of other kind of damage invoking kind of malwares and Trojans, but ransomware became way more popular because the attackers figured out they can actually make money out of this. So they can encrypt the disks, they can steal the data and threaten to publish it. And that makes much more of collateral damage in terms of PR, in terms of publicity, and also allows the attackers to really swipe in some cash as a result of this attack. 61% of incidents caused by supply chain attacks. We've all heard about SolarWinds, which was actually a very big event and kind of a turning point in our industry, where the actual break came through a supply chain software, not necessarily due to some kind of a security hole in the organization that is attacked. So these are very interesting in terms of security threats going forward. A few other findings from CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. We've seen that there's an increase in malicious cyber activity targeting MSPs. So the service providers are much more succinct to attacks because they are reaching a wider customer base, right? So if you attack one MSP, you could potentially reach a much wider audience. There's an increase in sophisticated, high-impact ransomware attacks, as mentioned, stolen credentials, phishing coming in emails or on websites, and these are becoming more and more sophisticated. And the last bit, it was weak security controls and practices routinely exploited for initial access. So it's somewhat surprising, but not so much when you think about it, that even the most horrible attacks could have been prevented with the use of MFA, multi-factor authentication, or software updates that were done not in time, or incorrect permission allocation in terms of opening up the entire network to specific employees that should not have had this kind of access. So all these actually leads us to talk a little bit about zero trust. And zero trust has been rising in kind of discussions and deployment over the last year or so. I've just talked to an analyst who mentioned there's a very significant increase in the deployment and adoption of zero trust, and even more budget allocated for that in 2022 and going forward. The rise of the remote and hybrid work after the pandemic is still with us, and that actually changes the attack surface for organizations. And they need to adopt much more sophisticated ways to protect themselves against those threats out there in the wild. This is so important that there was actually an executive order from the Biden administration to adopt zero trust security models. Imagine how important that is when the government agency is actually recommending you deploy security tools and methods that use this kind of methodology. So let's talk about what is zero trust architecture. So starting from 15 years ago or so, don't catch me on the day, we've had the case that remote users were accessing those servers, those organizational servers from wherever they were, just simply RDPing to them, SSHing to them, or just getting telnetting into those servers without any kind of security or protection. And at that point in time, the internet was was open wide, and everybody could access everything, such that malwares or viruses, this kind of red bug over here, could actually access even those sensitive servers of an organization because there were no actual protection methods. Then about 15 years ago or so, firewalls came into being and legacy VPNs started getting widely deployed. And this is when organizations started to deploy legacy VPN, which we call kind of a wide pipe that is connecting the user to the organizational network securely. However, that legacy VPN is opening up the entire network for every employee, because once they have an opening, a VPN entry into the organization, they can access everything and every IP address that exists within the organization. That way, when a user got infected by a malware, since they were having complete access to everything, that malware could easily, kind of move laterally and move into those sensitive servers, in which case the organization was compromised. Now, today we are looking into the zero trust network access model, which is much better in many ways that I'm going to mention now. So first of all, ZTNA is a narrower pipe, right? If you need to remember just one thing, it used to be a very wide pipe like the legacy VPN. We have narrowed down the pipe in the way that we are allowing specific employees to access only the minimum that they need to access in order to keep them effective. This is the zero trust, no trust, not trusting everyone, and giving everybody the exact level of permission they need in order to do their work, whereas by obfuscating the sensitive servers and blocking access to them from the outside world. So this is what ZTNA basically is, zero trust network access. And let's talk a little bit about why is it good? Why is it good for you, and why do you actually need it? So what I mentioned right now is called granular zero trust access to organizational resources. That means that employees would get only the granular level of permissions they need. That will allow the threat prevention by preventing unauthorized access to those sensitive resources. Remember that server on the left there, that was way better protected when we are using the zero trust access methods. Another threat prevention mechanism is the ability to prevent lateral movement within the organization. Once a user is not even seeing those sensitive servers from their endpoint, they cannot laterally, the malware or Trojan or whatever attack vector is being used cannot actually move laterally within the organization and infect those sensitive servers and those resources that should be in highest security. Another way to do threat prevention is by obfuscating sensitive parts of the network to all users. This is exactly what I mentioned, that users cannot even see those sensitive resources. The obfuscation part is a very critical piece of the ZTNA methodology. And the last bit is that ZTNA methodology allows application access to third party. So for example, if you have a third-party vendor or somebody from outside your organization that needs to access certain resources on your network, you can You can expose them to those applications with an agentless mode of access, such that it would hide the rest of the network. And those third-party vendors would only see the applications that they need in order to do their job, and not see the rest of the network, not see the IP addresses or any other resources. And that significantly reduces the attack surface. So out of all of this, you can see that using ZTNA is actually a great step forward with increasing your threat prevention capabilities and increasing the security of your organization. Right, I'll hand it over to Richard.
Thank you so much, Tal. That was great. If people don't know me, I'm a industry analyst, been around for a little bit. I was at Gartner from 2000 to 2004. Which puts it a little further back than 15 years, Tal, that firewalls and corporate VPNs were coming into play. I'm old enough to remember when VPN 1 was introduced by Checkpoint Software, the first IPsec VPN appliance at the time. And I come to this presentation a little humbly because zero trust is indeed a strategy, as John Kinnevarg says. And it's his strategy, right? He's the one who first formulated the entire concept, taken up by Chase Cunningham, also at Forrester at the time. And here I am on the outside. I didn't invent the term zero trust, and I'm happy I didn't, because I would not want the pressure that those two are under right now. But it fits very nicely with my take on these overarching security strategies. And if you think about it, there are only a couple others that come to mind. One of them is layered security, right? That's kind of where we all started, right? Because we added layers over time as various components of our infrastructure started to suffer from cyber attacks. So we added the endpoint antivirus first, because before there was network for everything, there were floppy disks that would have viruses distributed on them. And then the network came along. We had to have network defenses. We also needed identity and access management. So we built up this layered defense model. I count 17 different components to that. The other model is risk management, which is kind of it's quite the abstraction. You step way back, you try and marry a IT security strategy to that of the corporation. You try and adopt the language of the CFO, and you can read some of the things I've said about risk management. I'm not a fan of it. So let's talk about zero trust. One way to think of it is just least privileges everywhere, which is, we know that least privilege is a great standard for securely, offering access to anything, be it an app or a building. I like to look for trust interstices. These are the areas within your overarching architecture, including your business processes, where the only protection is where you apply trust. You say, you know what, that person gets access, and then we just trust them not to do anything bad. And there's many places you can find it. When I was at PwC, I used to look for those. I remember one case I was in at one of the biggest railroads in the United States, and they made a very common mistake. They trusted their customers, and they had launched a kind of online access to get into their systems and order up trains to come by your siding and pick up your cargo or drop cargo off. And they had deployed access controls that were a 4-letter shortening of the company name, and the password was the same thing. And they're just in the process, when I was doing the security audit for them, of moving all that to the internet from the old dedicated lines that they used to have. So they're trusting their customers not to abuse the system that they've given them complete access to. Let me give you a hint. Guess what Sony's username and password were? They were SONY. And of course, every other customer knows that must be the username and password, because they know the format of those things. So any one of them could say, hey, why don't we just send a train load of new Sony VCRs to the siding over here, and then we can loot all those rail cars. Well, I brought that up to the IT team, and they said, that's silly. Nobody's going to do that because we trust our customers. But I talked to somebody in operations, and he says, we do have a problem in the Chicago rail yard where cyber criminals or not cyber criminals, regular criminals are tipped off by people who work in the rail yard, who work, for the train company, about which cars have Sony products on them. And then as they roll out of the rail yard, the thieves jump on board, break into the cars, and throw them off onto the tracks where the rest of them collect them. Their control for that was to fly helicopters full-time with searchlights over the rail yard every night. Incredibly expensive, right? Thousands of dollars an hour to protect those rail cars. Long story short, trust is not a good thing when it comes to any type of security, let alone cybersecurity. So in the areas that I see trust being deployed the most is in employee agreements. So you're when you first sign on with a company, you agree to all these things. You're not going to engage in bad behavior. And over here is our security policy. You're not going to browse to bad websites. You're not going to steal our data. You're not going to access systems that you're not authorized to access. All these things, right? In other words, complete trust. Now, contracts with employees have an enforcement mechanism, right? It's implied that if you do any of these things, you're going to lose your job and benefits. And, if you're fired, you might not even get health coverage after you've been fired. So that's pretty strong, but it's nowhere near as strong as if somebody offers you $20,000 a day, as hackers have been doing lately, to grant them access to, some remote control access system for a computer or phone. They'll take the money. Or if a spy agency kidnaps somebody's family, right? They are going to do it. So it's silly not to have controls in place that will protect your organization, even if the worst case happens. Customers are another huge one. There was a big bank in Ohio that launched some new service. It was a data service. People get access to it and all the rest. And they charged for it, right? It's like $500 a month. Somebody, used a stolen credit card, bought access, and stole the entire database for $500, because they were trusting anybody who presented a credit card and paid $500 not to steal the data. And of course, the whole supply chain issue, right? Can you trust your customers and suppliers? In order to have at least as good security as you do, probably they need better because they're the channel of attack to get to you. And third parties, right? You're trusting that they will not abuse our network or data because we trust them. They want to do business with us. That's, trust is just a human element. We need trust, no question. You can't conduct business without trust. But I was just at a adoption center for pets yesterday, and they made us to adopt 2 kittens. They made us sign a contract, so we agreed that, we wouldn't abuse the kittens. We wouldn't declaw them. We would definitely have them fixed. All these things that were completely unenforceable. The only enforcement mechanism was that they trusted us to do what we signed up to do, which is crazy. And then for years and years, we've trusted the database analysts, right? So these are the people that have access to the keys to the kingdom. They see everything, right? So they see customer data, private data in hospital systems. They see all of the healthcare data, right? If a famous person checks into that hospital, the DBAs know why they're there and what their procedures were and what the diagnosis was. And we trust them and have no controls over what they're doing. And we don't tell them, hey, don't do this because we're watching you, because we don't have ways to watch them, right? And that's where the whole idea of privilege access management came about. So why does zero trust matter? So zero trust is a strategy that works everywhere. You can apply it everywhere, just like layered defense is a good strategy because you can apply it everywhere. But zero trust at least has principles behind it. And those principles are everyone is authenticated all the time. And they only get access to those things that their job or duties require them to get access to. So there's no more trust based on the fact that they logged in to the corporate network, which is the way we've been doing it for 2 decades now. Once you've VPN'd into the corporate network, then you get access to just about everything, despite industry analysts and, the influencers saying, you got to segment your network. And, it's like, really? Nobody does that. Nobody segments their network. You should have super granular segmented networks. For some reason, nobody does that. But zero trust, the kind of things that Tal was talking about, is actually microsegmentation, right? It's a segmentation between a user and a device and the application. The network's pulled completely out of the equation. Now, applications. Think of how much we trust the applications that we use every day. So you've got, you're using a network monitoring system from SolarWinds, or heck, we could just use Microsoft as a better example. If Microsoft says we've got an update version of the software, you schedule it for installation. If you're a consumer, you don't get that choice anymore. It's just going to be updated automatically. We completely trust Microsoft to send us good code. Obviously, Microsoft, SolarWinds, the guys at ME, at the accounting firm in Ukraine, ME Docs, I think it was called, do not have good enough security to prevent Russian hackers from getting into their systems and corrupting that software. They're not messing with it. They're not making it so it doesn't work. They're making it so it has extra features that are really hard to find. Even if you're scanning the code, you can't see it. And then my favorite bugaboo, I guess, is this idea that you can ask an endpoint if it's trustworthy before you allow it on the network. This is the old Cisco CNAC, which was just a concept from Cisco, but about 15 companies just took it and ran with it. Oh, what a great idea. Before we allow somebody on the network, we're going to query the semantic software running on that device, and we're going to ask it if it's got the latest signature updates. And then we're going to tell it you can't get on the network if you don't have the latest signature updates. It violates one of my rules of security, which is a secure network assumes that the host, the endpoints attaching to it, are hostile. And in a hostile network or a hostile endpoint is going to, it's like trivial to say a different MAC address, a different IP address, certainly a different, status of any security software that's running on that device. So you can't trust the endpoints explicitly like that. So, of course, we're in a major shift of just computing infrastructure across the board, and everybody is putting their apps in the cloud. So basically, the cloud is the new data center. We are getting rid of data centers. Is it FedEx that says by 2025, they're no longer going to maintain their own data centers? And FedEx has a lot of data in a lot of data centers, or at least floor space in data centers, because they're moving to the cloud, because you don't have to take care of all that hardware and you don't have to update it constantly. And of course, even FedEx can't get the kind of bandwidth and network connectivity that Google or Microsoft or Amazon can. So we're well along the way there. I mean, maybe it's still in the crossing the chasm stage where late adapters have barely started to do this, but everybody will do this eventually. That means that if somebody wants to use the old corporate network to access any of your own applications, you're still going to have to try and VPN into the corporate network, deal with all the hassles that VPN concentrators impose and get in your way. Then you're only going to have the network access that the corporation has purchased from headquarters or the data center to some application that's hosted on the other side of the world. It's going to be a horrible user experience. And frankly, it's kind of crazy when you look at the architecture. So at the same time, we're experiencing network transformation, because if the cloud's the new data center, the internet is becoming the new corporate network. So in short answer to the title of this webinar, the answer is get rid of the corporate network. You don't need those things. And I'm going to tell you why. The corporate network is hub and spoke, and it's been that way for all the time I've been in networking. So 27 years now. And it's because we didn't have the internet to worry about back then. So everybody got lease lines and connected all of their offices back to corporate network, and then really big lease lines, really expensive anyways, between the corporate hubs in various continents. And the everything about networking back then was actually telecom related. And if you talk to infrastructure engineers, they were the people who actually were constantly negotiating with telecom providers to get better rates on these T1s and fractional T1s. And sometimes, big organization would have a full T3, 45 megabit connection, which of course, I've got a 200 megabit connection here in my office. So if all the apps are already in the cloud, and frankly, all of our users are not in corporate headquarters anymore. We know that well, thanks to COVID. And, just the modern world that we're in, that we can all have conversations over video like this. If that's going on, why are you backhauling, tromboning traffic through headquarters to get to any of these services or applications? You shouldn't. It's a very, very old architecture, extremely expensive. You could fund your entire effort to shift away from the corporate network just in cost savings from eliminating all of those hub and spoke lease lines from your phone company. Phone company will support you in that because they know that each of those endpoints and your users are going to need internet access from them too. They know that the days are numbered for all of this, so they're not going to push back because they'll partner with companies like Perimeter 81 to do just this and help you make that important transition. So that's the whole concept of backhauling, right? You are tromboning traffic from end users through your corporate network and then back to the applications. You just want them to go straight to the application, but you want to apply these identity-based controls to them. So you're going to get there. So Zero Trust is a new architecture that makes all of this possible. And just one more story. So back when I was at Gartner, I went up to Alaska. Just Gartner would have the analysts, make trips right before customers' subscriptions were expiring. They'd want to demonstrate value. So then the customers got to see the analyst in person. So I'm talking to the Alaska pipeline, and I'm an engineer by training, so I'm going, how do you protect this thing that's hovering above this valuable tundra, and anybody could stand off a mile and shoot it with a high-powered rifle and cause a big, huge ecological disaster? And they said, oh, we've got sensing stations all along. It can measure that drop-off in pressure. We'll know right where it happens. And I said, oh, sensing station, how do they communicate back to you? And they said, oh, well, we've got modems at all those places. And I said, so like I could just war dial your extensions and I could find those modems and maybe get to the control systems? And then they said you could, except that we've pushed that little switch on the modems. And I used to have this in my ISP on the back of every modem. There used to be a switch that put it in callback mode. If anybody tried to connect to it, it would hang up immediately and then call the central office, right? It would call the only phone number that was programmed into it. That was Zero Trust networking of the day, right? Yeah, you can make a request, but you can't establish a connection afterwards. So get rid of the corporate network. That's my simple message. The data center has been replaced by the cloud. All the apps you have moved to the cloud. All the ones that you actually use are delivered as SaaS anyways. You've probably already moved your HR system. If you haven't moved your ERP systems, it's going to happen. It's like the SAP and Oracle have seen the writing on the wall, and they're introducing all those systems. So you're going to go there too. All of your users will have a better experience because the connectivity is better. And don't force them into these hairpinning maneuvers just to get access to something. So with that, I want to turn it over to Amit Bakarat, who is co-founder and CEO of Perimeter 81. Welcome, Amit.
Thank you so much, Richard. And I really enjoyed the walkthrough and the story and the analogy and everything that you've provided. Eventually, like zero trust and SASE and secure network over the internet is a kind of revolution that is happening all the time in the internet security and the cybersecurity space. And I believe that a customer showcase story from Aqua Security, who the CISO unfortunately couldn't join us today because of personal reasons, I will fill him up. Aqua Security was one of our first customers, and the beautiful thing about it is that they went with us a long way, and I was involved very on a personal level, together with the team and the implementation and what drove them to implement Print 81, and the migrations from the on-premises solutions to the internet and so forth. Eventually, it starts from the changes that are happening on the macro level. The internet became much faster. They found the need. Even they started with us before COVID, right? They found the need that people are working from anywhere, resources are moving to the cloud, which is the new data center, Richard, that you've mentioned, and they found themselves asking the following question, like the internet is the new corporate network, and how should I secure my corporate with a secure network solution that has a great fit, a product market fit for the internet area. And they started with us, and they joined us very early with few challenges. One, they had three offices all over the world, both in Israel and the US, and utilized on-premise firewalls, FortiGates, for that specific use case. They had resources behind that FortiGates, and they utilized the Forti token VPN to connect to and backhaul all the traffic to the traditional firewalls, right? On the other end, they have increasing use of cloud and Azure cloud and workloads that they run there. At that point, they've implemented a cloud-based Active Directory, Azure Active Directory in that regards, that they wanted to integrate between all these points. And they looked for a solution that is easy to install, right? It's a complete SaaS solution, if you think about it, like moving away from an on-premise email server to Office 365. That's what they wanted to create with their network. They looked for a solution, in that case, Print 31, that will allow them to create a scalable and easy to use secured network that is operated over the cloud without them needing to install any hardware, as well as a native integration to the Azure Active Directory. So they have a seamless experience end-to-end from the minute the user authenticates till the user accessing the on-premise and local resources. And throughout that, basically work together with them. We have a tangled together few major, I would say, challenges in matter of migration. What we understood is Aqua was really one of our first customers that had a pretty large scale of use of on-premise solutions, that when you implement a solution like Print 31, it's not a rip and replace on day zero, right? You can start with us, create your secure network in the cloud, and slowly start to migrate use cases and departments, right? Whether you can start from the QA or R&D, and then going forward to a larger scale, and that way to do that migration, which sometimes is a bit cumbersome, but it's relatively very simple over time, and to increase your confidence. And that basically is a great success story, because they are customers of us from 2018, really from the beginning. Now we introduced the secured gateway offering, so it's not only remote access but also internet security to secure their employees, and have long gone a long way, right? Separately of enabling and securing the networking, we found that they have saved a lot in matter of management. The teams need to invest much less time in managing the day-to-day, right? Because it's a SaaS solution that is completely managed, and updates and upgrades to their own premises, and also allow them to open up more locations and more offices and to work in a hybrid when COVID started, right? In a ease. And that is something that I think reiterates and basically everyone can connect to. Eventually, I believe that if we step aside from macro security and step up, the internet is the new corporate network, Richard, as you mentioned. The new data center is the cloud, right? And the on-premise appliances and the way we used to consume security is going to change. And Aqua is a great success story of a company that did that migration really early on, right, in 2018. But today, we see that companies will continue to do that in the next 10 to 15 years. And I can say that our product and our solution in Parent 81 is already in a very matured state in order to allow companies to do so. And separately to the product, we offer also a range of customer success and support teams that will work with our customers in order to navigate them through that journey. And I will continue now to Kim, or back to Tal.
Thanks, Amit. This is a very good story. We would like to follow up with some questions from the audience. So now would be a good time to type in your questions on the sidebar. Just one reminder, if you look at the sidebar, look at the attachment icon, there are some documents there that can be very beneficial for you. Some studies from Gartner, other analysts as well, and some other material to read up as a follow-up to our talk today. So I'll start with one question to Richard, actually. Richard, how do you see the ZTNA adoption progressing? How widely is it adopted?
Oh, that's a great question, because, for a couple of years, I wrote a book on this, and for a couple of years, I just thought everybody's doing this, because I only talked and interviewed people that, at very large, very stodgy companies that were doing just this. And then it took me a little while to remember that, my crossing the chasm stories that I had studied, that, wow, we are early in this game, not in the middle of it or not late. So I would say maybe 20% of large enterprise, and a much smaller percentage of SMB, right? Because SMB are the ones that are going to benefit the most, right? Just straight out, they're not going to be replacing their VPN concentrator. They're going to be getting all the benefits of network security without having to buy $1 million stack of hardware to put in a closet because they don't have a data center. So I'm, super excited about the fact that as adoption continues and we get to that 50, 60%, we're actually going to have a much, much more secure ecosystem.
Okay, thanks for that, Richard. Another question, are there any specific or unique challenges when seeking to implement zero trust for an enterprise organization versus a medium company or SMB? I can take on that. So it's a good question. I think that there are differences in the deployment model and the security requirements and the IT requirements when it comes to smaller organization versus a larger one. The main difference is with the skill set. In many cases, in the smaller organizations, the SMBs, they have one person managing the entire IT department, and sometimes they don't necessarily have all the skill set. They're less of an expert in security domains. So they need an easy to use kind of software, an easy to use kind of tool to manage the security on their organization. And the more consolidation, the better, right? The more convergence is better, because the more tools that you use, the harder it gets to keep them all synchronized and working well together. So a converged kind of platform and an easy to use platform is much more of a requirement. It's a much more critical requirement when it comes to smaller organizations, as an example. All right, I think being mindful of time, we'll move forward to the demo. Kim, go ahead and take it away.
Perfect, and very well said, Tal. We've talked a lot about on the webinar thus far why zero trust is so critical, but also topical for how organizations are working now. What is zero trust? We've talked a little bit about that, and now we kind of want to talk about how you implement zero trust. What does it look like architecturally for a more complex, right, medium to large enterprise? How do you implement it? So I'm going to share my screen here and walk through a bit of a demo. There we go. If an organization ends up looking into zero trust with Perimeter 81, you'll end up with somebody in my part of the organization in conjunction with our customer success team. So we want to start thinking about, how is this implemented? You know, for medium to large enterprises, it's more complex, right? You're not just thinking about, okay, will this be enterprise grade and work well for my team here in, let's say, New York City? But in the way that people are working now, they could be working from anywhere in the world. You could have offices across the United States, across the world. And so you want to make sure that it's going to work for all of your end users and your IT team internally. So what I'm sharing now is just an overview of our architecture. And the reason I share this is so that you can kind of grasp architecturally how it looks to implement Perimeter 81. So much like Tal and Amit shared, our focus is to deliver enterprise-grade security for the organization and move them towards zero trust. So we're really focused on protecting the entire corporate stack. And yes, that includes on-premise resources that you might have, cloud infrastructure that you might have, software as a service tools, but we also include the internet as part of the corporate stack as well. Amit touched on this a little bit, but secure web gateway, protecting the open web, all of those things are important to enterprises who are looking to deploy zero trust. So when we create a network for an organization, which we've now done for over 2,500 customers at this point around the world, we really want to make a network, right, that's going to be as secure as possible. And that means thinking about redundancy on every level. We, as Perimeter 81, have a network of data centers all over the world that we manage and make sure are secure. And so when we're building a network for an organization, we just did one this last month, for example, 1,000 user organization, where they had employees in Georgia and California and Chicago, in Brazil and Argentina and Sydney and the Philippines and Portugal. And so we want to build a network that's going to work best for all of those different teams across the organization. And so we'll build a network that includes regions that align with those users. It includes gateways in those regions that are dedicated to the organization, and then making sure there's redundant tunneling to the infrastructure. This was touched on as well, but we're a full firewall as a service for cloud infrastructure. So yes, we're replacing remote access, and we're also replacing any virtual firewalls for cloud that may be in play. So, especially as a medium to large enterprise, you really need to work with a provider that's going to be completely agnostic. We're infrastructure agnostic. We can connect to anything. As Amit shared, we're entirely software based, so we don't ship hardware. We're very easy to deploy. But we want to make sure that ultimately the end users are going to have secure, and as Richard said, least privilege access to the corporate stack resources. So your IT team, your system administrators, your infrastructure security team, whoever's doing the administration, are going to be able to control what is being accessed. And that's, very granularly. You could say just Richard should have access to this specific port or subnet, or just our dev team. So you're controlling what they're accessing as well as how they're accessing it. So you're really able to factor in all the elements. We work with organizations who have a hard no on BYOD, as a policy. So it's completely company-owned devices, managed, and maybe they have more strict compliance requirements. And then we have organizations where they want to enable BYOD. And so you're able to control those endpoints, the end user experience, as well. So how they're able to access that infrastructure. We're agnostic in terms of identity providers as well. So single sign-on, multi-factor, we can integrate with every major provider. Same on the logs end, we work with SIM providers to push back logs if desired. So really great for the medium to large enterprise space because we are so agnostic. Becomes even more important if your enterprise is one that regularly does transactions. So we work with a ton of companies. We're a very good fit if you do acquisitions regularly, right? Maybe there's a merger on the docket in future. These organizations have to be agile from an infrastructure perspective. They need to be able to connect to everything. And we even have a couple different types of tunneling where most organizations don't to get into that infrastructure. So very, very agile, scalable for a large organization. You'll notice here, there's two different types of connectivity for the end user. So I'll show you a little bit into the admin perspective and into the end user perspective. But there's two types of connectivity down here. You'll see a client or an agent, and you'll also see agentless access. We have both, not true of a lot of organizations in the space. Again, a great play for scalability for enterprises. The client or agent, probably most people on this call are more familiar with that type of end user experience. Very great for, when endpoints are managed, when you're really looking for a low touch end user experience. Maybe you want some additional security checks in place, right? Device posture checks. So that's definitely where the agent is most commonly used. Again, to scalability, we connect to all ports and protocols. We're operating system agnostic, very rare. So a great fit. And you'll see agentless as well, which most enterprises are using kind of both types of connectivity, but agentless is a lot more common for that bring your own device use case, for contractors, for consultants, for third parties. So if you're wondering, how it's going to be, how the Zero Trust is going to be implemented, it might be different across different teams within the organization, which I will speak to. I'll show the IT end user experience first. So just getting into the platform, right? This is the central management platform. Let's pop into a sample network here. So this is a network that you might build for your enterprise. Like I said in the example we did just this last month. This could be a typical network where they have maybe end users tapping in from various regions around the world. We've spun up gateways in these regions with static IP addresses. Beautiful for redundancy. We've got not only different regions, but we've got multiple gateways in each region. It makes the network more highly available, more scalable, and then we're connecting to infrastructure ultimately, right? Which could be your cloud infrastructure, it could be your on-prem infrastructure. We can help create interconnectivity between environments, but we'll connect into that infrastructure. And then just like Richard spoke to earlier, we really want to hit on least privilege, right? We were ranked leader in Zero Trust by Forrester this last year. I know there's some attachments in the attachments section you could take a look at. But the reason to move to Zero Trust is really to say, by default, nobody should get access to anything in Perimeter 81's network. And let's be really thoughtful about what they're accessing, how they're accessing, etc. So once a network is built, we're typically integrating with an identity provider of some sort, potentially instituting multi-factor depending on maybe compliance requirements of the organization. We can inherit anything. We can also even turn on two-factor natively, which is pretty rare in the space. Members will port into the platform. Groups can port into the platform as well. So, if you've got a dev team or a Japan-based team in your identity provider, you can have users port into those groups. And then you can use the users and the groups to do restriction, to create those firewall rules. So if you were to leave that network that we built just as is, you'd be saying everybody should get access to everything in this network. True to Zero Trust, right? We probably don't want to do that for a variety of reasons. So we can come into the firewall, and much like a more traditional old school firewall, you can set a default action. So you could say default deny access to everything for everyone, and maybe let's set some allow rules about what specific user or what specific group should have access to, right? Some specific area of your infrastructure. So you're able to control very granularly what a user is accessing. Same goes for internet, right? We not only have DNS filtering, but as Amit mentioned, we have a secure web gateway with full TLS inspection. So you can control that internet experience as well. What do you want to allow access to, deny access to, down to a specific user, down to a specific group, down to categories, sites. You can do time-based restriction, right? So maybe a certain team in your organization, it's not appropriate for them to go to streaming services. You can make a stringent rule for that group of users that will be applied, and maybe other users it's more acceptable. So that's kind of you're controlling what they're accessing. All of what I've showed in the admin platform up to this point is for agent-based access. So this is kind of that client or agent. You can see I'm connected to it right now. So most enterprise organizations, right, might use some type of device manager. We work with, all of the above. So we can help you deploy the agent to endpoints if desired. Like I said, we're operating system agnostic, but what's happening when I'm connecting to the agent is it automatically knows my location. It will automatically connect me to the closest point of presence on this given network and only connect me to the resources specified. And like I mentioned, it will not only authenticate the user, but you can also check for device credentials. So, given a specific group of users, even for, right, maybe a more strict group of users or network-wide, you can check for different criteria. Great examples that we see a lot of enterprises check for, maybe the specific antivirus that they're using, maybe a certificate that's on the endpoints or has been pushed out through the device manager, maybe disk encryption. So it can authenticate not only, okay, is this person who they say they are, but are they in fact coming from our company owned and issued device? So really giving that least privilege, trust nothing by default, access to the environment. And the agent, like I said, is very low touch for the end user. In terms of BYOD, contractors, consultants, that's where this application tab really comes in. For these people that I mentioned, oftentimes with these parties, what you're worried about is the endpoint, right? If I'm going to be accessing for a personal device, how does Perimeter 81 know that my endpoint is safe? It doesn't have, malicious content on it that's going to infect and harm the network. And that's really where agentless access is beautiful. And like I said, most organizations use it at least for a chunk of their organization. But the end user experience looks like this. So they do not need an agent. They do not need a client. It's a reverse proxy through the browser. You can emulate specific applications so that the user can authenticate through the browser and get access just to a very narrow application through the browser itself. So it's very secure. You don't have to worry about their endpoint harming the network. The best part of all of this is we really do help you implement. We've got a full network engineering team that works 24/7. We're a rare organization that we give dedicated support to help build this all out. So that's a little bit on how to implement.
All right. Thank you very much, Kim. This was a great demo. We have time for one last question that came in. The question is, why the name Perimeter 81? What is the reason? And the second question, so you manage a multi-cloud architecture no matter what server or endpoint is running. So I'll answer the first question, the easier one. So Perimeter 81 was established 4 years ago by Amit and Sagi. And perimeter is, I think it's kind of obvious because we're basically eliminating the perimeter, right? We are protecting all the organizational assets without actually having one perimeter in which they all need to reside. So all the cloud resources are up there in the cloud. We have on-prem servers. We have users remote working or everywhere. So there is no more perimeter. It's actually dissolving, and we are protecting everybody and everything just as if they were still in this kind of closed perimeter. So this is the reason for perimeter. 81 is the number of the unit that one of our founders came from, Amit. So they added 81 to the name. Second question about the multi-cloud architecture. So we do have a multi-cloud architecture, and we can protect, we support multiple types of endpoints, including Windows, Mac OS. We support mobile devices such as Android and iOS and also Linux machines. So we do have a wide variety of supported endpoints and agents. And in terms of the organizational servers, yes, we do protect pretty much everything in terms of whether it's AWS, Azure, GCP in terms of cloud resources, or whether they are on-prem protected by a router, a gateway. We can basically connect to that router or gateway and have them terminate our VPN connection. And one last question, what if the defense breaks and breach happens? So it's a multi-million-dollar question, right? So if a breach happens, ZTNA, Zero Trust, can actually help eliminate some of the damage that can happen once a breach has already happened. So for example, if a specific employee was infected by a malware and the organization actually used ZTNA and use granular access permissions, the damage that malware can cause is much greatly reduced by the fact that this employee does not have access to certain parts of the network. So for example, if a malware is designed to encrypt certain disks or steal specific credentials, in a good microsegmentation method, as Richard mentioned, there is a way to actually create such a mechanism so that the user would not be able to reach those resources and the malware would not be able to reach those resources. So the malware can propagate through the network, but it would not reach the sensitive areas, as an example. So that's a way to minimize the impact, I think. Richard, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, because you're logging everything, your time to breach detection and response is going to be drastically shortened, right? You'll know what's going on.
Exactly. That's a great point. Thank you, Richard. All right, I think we'll wrap up at this. Thank you very much, Richard, Amit, and Kim. I enjoyed this greatly and hope to see you all in our next webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Tal.